What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to episode 10 of The Devil's Advocates. Today, I will be taking over as host. JP is out of town and can't make it today. I'm joined by Jake and BP. Guys, what's going on? How we doing? How we feeling?
Hey yo.
Doing pretty good. I'm excited. This is kind of, I don't know if you guys follow along on Twitter, but tier lists are kind of my thing. This is kind of in my wheelhouse.
I don't follow you.
Yeah, I know. I It's not for you, okay?
It's for the masses, and that's what we're doing today. Just to get right into it, we are doing just a simple tier list of teams who we think are going to make the playoffs, anywhere ranking from teams who are going to be at the bottom fighting for the number one overall pick, anywhere in between, bubble teams, teams who can make a run, and then teams who are going to rival the Devils for making a Stanley Cup final run. And I guess we can just kind of get into it right away. At the very bottom, we can just get started with teams who we think are going to be fighting for the number one overall pick. Sorry for the YouTube people. I am looking at my phone because that's the only way I can look at our lists.
Yeah, so for the record, we each named our tiers differently, but we all have 6 tiers.
Would you like to go over the names of your tiers?
Yes.
Sure.
BP, you wanna start it off?
Yeah, you know what? We'll let Jake go last here. My bottom tier is Columbus. Pretty self-explanatory. Ohio is always going to be last in the league, no matter where they finish with points. I think Bettman should keep them out of the playoffs, even if they have enough points to theoretically play in the playoffs. I think, you got to give the people what they want, and no one wants to see them do anything. Next tier up, we have fighting for the number one draft pick. Then we have the teams that are mid. These are teams that are not going to make the playoffs, but are a little too good to really be bottom of the barrel. Then I got my bubble playoff teams. For the most part in that tier, I think they should make the playoffs. I believe in my top 3 tiers, I have 17 teams, which means at least one team from my bubble playoffs tier theoretically should not make the playoffs, but they're on the bubble. Yeah, so I have can make a run, and then cup contenders. Teams that are safely in the playoffs and can make some noise while they're there, and then the teams that are really, really expected to be there by the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals, excuse me. At the end there.
Okay, and then Jake, if you want to go next.
Sure. I thought BP said I should go last, but I can go next.
Yeah, you're next in the chat, so I'm just gonna keep it.
Sure.
easy.
So I'm going to start from the top. I have my top tier as such, with the S separated as an S tier, such cup contenders. Next tier down is A tier, so A run is possible. Very similar to BP. It's the teams that I think are the favorites, and then teams that I think could absolutely make a run. It's hockey, it's the playoffs. There's always a team that surprisingly makes the finals almost every year, or a team that even wins it unexpectedly. So really any team in these two groups I think could be considered favorites. From there, it's B, barely playoffs. It's my playoff bubble teams, but I hedge them up as favorites. They'll be a bubble position almost all season and are likely to make the playoffs. I have 15 teams in these top tiers, meaning one of the teams in my next C tier of can't be taken seriously will end up making the playoffs. I really do think these two middle tiers are fairly interchangeable for a lot of the teams, but I think they're fairly well divided. I'd be surprised if any of my top 15 really do fall out. And then it wouldn't surprise me if almost any just one of this C tier teams do make it.
I didn't even notice you had. Never mind. You have one team down there that I'm very surprised at, actually.
I can't wait to get into it.
Spoiler alert! What is going on?
It's the first time I'm looking at it.
After that, I've got my D tier for don't even bother. These are my teams that will be fighting for lottery tickets to win the first overall pick. We'll get a little bit more into that as we work our way up each of our boards, my thoughts on how that's going to play out this year. And then finally, in my F tier, we have Flyers.
Yeah.
Also self-explanatory. I think they're awful, garbage, and they're from Philly, and they're the Flyers, so they deserve to be there.
After you guys sent your tier lists in the chat, I wanted to put Montreal at the very bottom. That way I could have my own separate team at the bottom, but there's nothing.
We each single out one team.
Yeah, there's nothing that in Montreal or Canadiens that can put them at the bottom. But if I did have to choose one team outside of my bottom team to my bottom tier, I'd probably choose the Canadiens. But working my way up, I have fighting for the number one overall pick teams that I think have basically no chance at making the playoffs and will definitely be in contention for. I don't even know who the top 2024 overall pick will be.
That was gonna be my point later.
Isn't
Name-
it
name a
Macklin
favorite.
Celebrini?
Right, Macklin Celebrini. I think that's the name. Yeah, yeah, they'll be
Fun
going for
fact,
him.
side tangent. The only reason I know that is because NHL 23 franchise mode. I guess he wasn't number one overall, so he slid to me in the draft. I took him. Had no idea who he was. Like literally had never heard that name before. Played a couple years of Chell in franchise. He went up to like a 95. Was leading my team in goals, and I was like, "Who the hell is this guy?" And then after last year's draft, articles started to come out of like, way too early, 2024. Who's gonna go first overall? And a couple of them had Celebrini up first. And I was like, good job, me.
You're like, I knew before you guys did.
Our known prospect expert BP.
Yeah,
Rushing.
hire me as a scout because I called that shit from day one. Just saying.
You might have a better eye at prospects than JP. He's kind of biting the bullet with Lenny
Back
these
in a
past couple
zero.
days.
Yeah, Haminaho probably listened to the podcast, probably heard what JP said, and has just been on an absolute revenge tour ever since. And I'm here for it.
Credit to JP for getting Lenny going. Just to wrap up my tiers, it's fighting for number one overall pick. Aggressively mid, so teams who are not quite as awful as the teams below them, but not good enough to get into the playoff bubble. Then I have my bubble teams, who I think will be right there till the very end of the season, fighting for the last playoff spot. I have 16 teams in my top 3 and 16 in my bottom 3 tiers. Next year I have playoffs teams who I think will be in the playoffs but might not do anything. Then I have teams who can make a run. And then I have my 5 cup contenders.
Also, before we move forward, I would just like to say, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to say that someone is sponsoring something when they're not actually. So this is my legal disclaimer that they're not actually sponsoring it. But my tier list is sponsored by the Tom's River Brewery. They gave me this shirt. They did a collaboration with the Devils. YouTube people, you can see me throwing it up here. It was sick, or it is sick. Thank you to them for that. Again, I don't know if I'm legally allowed to say they're sponsoring my tier list, so I'm joking, but my tier list is sponsored by Tom's River Brewery.
Used to drive past them every day on my commute to work.
Yeah, it's solid. I like a lot of their stuff. Free ad here. I stopped in. Yeah, I stopped in. I actually have been there a few times now, and I had no idea they were even Devils fans. I was just in the area. I do some business in the area, and so I've been there a couple times. Always enjoyed it. Always had a good time. And this past season, found out that the owners are Devils fans, and they worked with the Devils. They did the stick toss beer that is sold in the arena. Full disclosure, I think they're Brat Pack fans over there. So I was in contact with them.
You just lost them business.
Yeah. Thank you to Tom's River Brewery, and I'm sorry to Tom's River Brewery. No, I'm kidding. But definitely keep an eye out for them with more Devils-related stuff. I believe, again, I'm totally speaking out of my ass here. This is not anything that I've heard or know to be true, but I assume they should be working with the Devils again, judging by how well it went last year. So if you don't know the name, learn it now.
You heard it here first, kinda.
Any collabs that the Devils do with Jersey-owned companies and like breweries and stuff like that is pretty cool. I'm glad to see that we're starting to kind of do that type of thing with them, and then with the Eric LeGrand Coffee House as the away. I think it's the away helmet sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Buy Black program. Stay mad haters in the Devils comments. That always, full report yourself on Twitter each time they post about it. So shout out to you guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
But different topic.
I was gonna say, okay, on that note, we can.
Yeah. Well, I could go off in a full tangent about how LeGrand Whiskey also works with Brat Pack for the outings. But I'll save that because we're going to be announcing one this week.
Nice.
You heard it here first. Podcast
Yeah.
exclusive.
I don't know about you
Yeah.
guys, but I want to start at the bottom for
Yeah.
the tiers.
Oh,
let's do it.
yeah. Okay, we can
So-
start off at the bottom, fighting for the number 1 overall pick, or F, Flyers, or Columbus tier. I don't know if you guys want to do your bottom tier. You have 6 each?
I have 6.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
And you're like in the bottom.
Columbus is the bottom if we're gonna be.
So
Really,
if
and I could
if
riff
I'm
for like 10 minutes
talking-
on that.
Yeah, if I'm talking by purely, I don't think they even have a shot at playoff tiers combined. I've got 8 teams. That's going to be my bottom F tier of Flyers, which is just the Flyers. I really don't think it's a hot take at all to say that this team has no shot. I legitimately think they're probably the worst team in the league.
on paper they seem like one of the worst. If
The only
not the
other
worst.
the only other team, people might argue would be worse is going to be like, the Coyotes. But I do want to touch on what you said before with, blanking on, who's the first overall pick? Obviously, you wouldn't have done that with Bedard at all leading up to his draft.
I also just think it's a matter of fact that like we're at the point as a franchise and a team that like I don't really care anymore about.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Right.
So I'm not paying attention.
But what I'm getting, but even us not caring leading into this draft, you still knew Bedard.
oh yeah.
My point is, last year,
Yeah.
teams were very obviously and actively looking to tank for Bedard. I don't think that's the case for this upcoming draft. I don't think teams are going to like as heavily tank as they did last season.
Bottom out, yeah.
Really bottom out, right? And I think Coyotes are going to actually try and win some games because they need to win a contract for a new stadium. Like they need to actively try this season.
They need to
A little
be in, like,
bit.
the bubble tier.
They still want to kind of be a little bad, but they're not going to actively tank. Chicago, another god awful team that is in my don't even bother tier with the Coyotes.
Mhm.
I think same thing. They're going to want to put butts in seats, which Bedard's basically going to do himself. And Bedard Hall is probably going to carry them enough to not be outright tanking, but obviously still not playoff caliber.
They'll be watchable.
Right.
because of those
They'll be fun. They'll be
Sure,
fun.
fun.
Whether they're winning or not.
Arguably.
That's
They'll be fun.
They're at that point of the rebuild. They'll be fun.
Ducks, I really feel like should be better. Is another team I have in my don't even bother.
Dirty.
Should be better. They have a lot of young talent. Like maybe they explode, but even their underlines last year didn't look that great. Goaltending is still very sus if Gibson's there or not. So again, I just don't think they have a chance really. But they're definitely a team that's more on the up and up compared to basically every other team in this tier, save maybe one.
I like their prospect, their prospect system, along with Chicago's the best out of so far. Who you said on the bottom?
Rounding out these, I got 4 more teams real quick. Capitals. Again, I kind of spoke on it when we talked about the Metro. I don't think they really have a chance of making playoffs out of the Metro at all.
No.
So that's really why they ended up here. They obviously have some talent, but they're not really cup chasing anymore. They're OV goal chasing.
Yeah.
And so they're going to kind of just plateau in that mediocrity spot, which is fine for their organization. They got their cup with OV, and to them, OV getting that record is way more important than winning a cup, I think. So they'll kind of just teeter-totter right in this mediocrity tier. And then the Habs, they're not ready to take that step yet. The Atlantic is brutal, so I just don't think they have a chance again just being in the Atlantic. If they were in the West, they maybe move up for me because I did take division and conference into consideration for these.
Okay.
But then rounding out my don't even bother tier is 2 Western teams and the Sharks, who, well, they're the Sharks, just not that great. And then finally, I've got Vancouver, who I think I have Vancouver rated lower than both of you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And that's just because they're just bad. It's just bad vibes. They've got so much wasted money in so many bad players. Hughes and Pedersen will do their best to keep them out of the top 3 draft spots, but everybody else will keep them out of the playoffs.
Are you not buying that late season surge that they've done a couple years in a row again?
They always do it because the pressure's off, and then they can just kind of play loose and free.
Yep.
And they just have the worst fans in the league. So yeah, no, they don't even bother. But yeah, so bottom tier Flyers, don't even bother. Capitals, Ducks, Coyotes, Blackhawks, Habs, Canucks, Sharks. And I'll kind of stop there and let you guys kind of handle it.
So is that your
No
bottom,
chance tier.
So is that your bottom 2 then?
That's my bottom 2. So that's
Okay.
8 teams in total fill those. Flyers, obviously, solely holding Flyers. Don't even bother the other 7.
Did you mention Columbus?
No.
No, you did. Okay. I'll go next. I feel like we have a bunch of the same. My fighting for the number 1 overall pick, I mean, Anaheim, Chicago, Philly, San Jose, and Washington, I feel like kind of all speak for themselves. I kind of want to move Washington up one more just because I like their top guns, and I do think Darcy Kemper is going to bounce back. I don't think he had a bad year last year, but I do think he'll bounce back enough this year that he'll keep them out of the cellar. So preemptively, I am moving them up one tier, but still in the they have no chance to make the playoffs.
Are you factoring in the Metro at all? Just like so, obviously in a vacuum, their roster, I might be able to argue.
Yeah, no,
kind of
I
what
still
you're
think
saying.
right. I think in our predictions, I think I still had them 7th. So they're still trash to me, but I'm for the sake of the tier list, I'm moving them out of the cellar because I think the cellar is very defined with Chicago, Anaheim, Philly, and then I think San Jose too. San Jose can kind of go back and forth. Um, my aggressively mid tier is Arizona, Columbus, Montreal, who I want to put in last, Detroit, and then St. Louis. I don't think you mentioned Detroit or St. Louis either.
Nope.
No.
Did not.
Detroit. I mean, you know me. I climb on the Yzer plan more than most people. I just don't trust what they're doing. Really, it's kind of been 2 or 3 seasons in a row where they've kind of like bought and sold. I don't really know what they're doing.
Sounds like you don't trust the Yzer plan.
I definitely do not. I'm very outspoken about the Yzer plan. I don't trust it at all. Their goaltending is awful. Ville Husso, I think they got Alex Lyon, and then who's their third? I don't remember who they brought in as a third, but they clearly can't be good enough for me to remember them. I just don't think they're very good. Their defense doesn't really do anything for me either out of Cider. And then St. Louis just got older and slower again this offseason, bringing in Kevin Hayes. Defense, they're old and slow again. Colton Parayko is probably one of the worst contracts in the NHL, and then Jordan Binnington in net. Outside of that cup run back in 2019, he hasn't really gotten back to that level, and I don't think he'll get back to that level. And they're kind of stuck with this older core minus Jordan Kyrou and those guys. Out of my aggressively mid, I probably have Arizona at the very top, just outside my bubble range. So I do think that adding Logan Cooley.
So, you like Arizona over both Detroit and St. Louis?
Yeah, their defense is the worst.
I disagree with that. But okay,
Their defense is the worst. I like their forwards a lot. Barry Hayton, Nick Schmaltz, those guys. I think they have a ton of talent up front in goaltending in the net. They have Pamelka, and then I forget who their backup is, but I trust those guys in the back end in net more than I trust Ville Husso and then whoever St. Louis has going for them.
I don't know that I agree with that even a little bit.
yeah,
I'll
disagree on that one too.
Like with any rebuilding team, Arizona is going to start getting better.
Wait, hold on. Let me rephrase that. Sorry. I like them the most out of using the watchability. I think they're going to be the most fun out of the teams, and I definitely like them more moving forward. I just think that Detroit and St. Louis are just like so bland. They're boring. I just don't think they're going to do anything.
So you have them all in the same tier.
These are all in the same tier, but
which is fine.
Arizona I have ahead of them.
But you would put the most likely that you think of these teams in your aggressively mid between the Yotes, Columbus, Habs, Red Wings, and Blues. You think the Yotes had the best chance of being a bubble team out of those teams?
Over all those other teams, yes.
Yeah,
I think they're top 6, and plus Logan Cooley coming into the mix, I think he's going to hit the ground running, and he's uber talented. I think. I
disagree.
I mean, on paper, I like their top 9, and I like their goaltending. Their defense is super suspect, though. I will admit.
I'll let PP talk.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, so what I was going to say was, like any lottery team for many years, the prospects enter the system, they mature a little bit, the team does get better. We saw with the Devils that sometimes the roster doesn't change a whole lot, but the points go up just because certain guys are growing and getting better. We are going to see that from Arizona. I understand where that's coming from. I just don't think they're there yet. And I don't think this season we see them above teams like St. Louis particularly. I mean, they might fight to push above a team like Detroit. I think St. Louis is still just, I mean, I don't mean to be corny here, but a tier above Arizona still. It's very possible they show signs of promise and life, and it's not as hopeless as last year.
No,
I
definitely
don't have
not.
them above St. Louis, and this may be a complete non-point. This may be the point in the episode where I just say nonsense, and you guys are like, nah, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I'm just gonna say it. Arizona, in their situation, playing in the rink that they're playing in, ownership has no idea where they're going next. All the drama that surrounds them, I just feel like that does take somewhat of a mental, emotional toll. I mean, any job, whether it's professional athlete or not, when management is in turmoil and the organization sucks, you can feel that in your performance for the most part. Maybe these guys feel it less than people like you or I would, but I have a hard time believing it doesn't. The noise doesn't, get into that locker room at all. I'm not saying that it is going to dictate how their season goes, but there is this atmosphere, this feeling that when your higher ups, I mean, think about even in school, when the teacher sucked, even if it was a class you were good in, your grades may have suffered because you weren't trying for that teacher. You knew it was
Like
shitty.
the morale was low, is what you're basically getting.
Yeah, morale's just
Yeah.
low. I'm not saying that Arizona's organization is going to be the talk of the locker room after every game. The players are not going to try and all that. That's really not what I'm getting at. But it would be hard to ignore the fact that there is all this stuff around them. There has to be a general vibe of incompetence of the organization. I just feel like that does hamper them even a little bit. Is that even a little bit valid?
I'm with you. Yeah, no, at least a little bit valid, if not
All
a
right.
little bit more. At least a
I'll
little
take
bit
it.
valid.
Let's go. Good idea. Beat Pete.
It is. Sorry, go ahead.
My pushback on that one, Andrew, is going to be that in the Central, where Arizona is, for me there, and we're going to get into this later as we get higher up these tiers,
Yeah.
there's really only two teams I have as definite playoff teams, in my opinion.
Three of them have to make it a minimum.
So 3 have to make it, right?
Yeah.
Obviously. Duh. But I'm saying 2 of them
You have
are
as like
definite.
locks. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
locks, 2 of those teams. Everyone else, outside of, I don't think Yotes are a bubble team. We'll get into the tiers, but
Yeah.
I only think 2. Every other division has at least, I think, 3 or 4 teams that I have fairly confident, if not absolute locks of 3 people making it. So the Central's the most wide open to me.
That's fair.
I just don't see how the Blues over a full regular season perform worse
They're old.
than the Yotes.
They're old. They stink.
I
Craig
just-
Berube. There was talks last year
At
that
least,
there was.
at minimum, I would still take
I think the
the
bottom 2
current for pure current season forwards. I'm still taking Blues over Yotes. I mean,
Sure.
Kyrou, Thomas, Shen, Buchnevich, those 3. And then, I mean, Hayes is old. Sod's getting older. Vrana's only 27 still. But, like,
That was a good pickup. I like that.
yeah. So even just counting Kyrou, Thomas, Shen, I have confidence in those 3 to pull them. And then they at least have a steady decor. They might not be elite.
It stinks. It's
the name. It's like
the name
steady.
brand.
It is fairly name brand. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But I still think it's buoyable.
Serviceable.
Sure.
Right. To jump slightly ahead, Blues are only in my they're not even a bubble team. I'm pretty positive. Yeah, can't be taken seriously tier.
That's
so
a very
so
good
it's
way
not
to
like
put the Blues.
it's not like I'm high on the Blues.
No,
Just
I don't
if we're
think you should
talking if I had to pick, obviously I put them a tier higher. If I had to pick between Blues and Yotes, I would go Blues.
I think the thing is I was going to get to this when you guys were going on your rants or whatever before. They kind of remind me-ish of the Sabres, but worse from last year. They're going to be really fun. I think they're going to score a ton of goals, but they're going to give up a lot because their defense is so bad. And granted, Arizona doesn't have the Dahlin, the Power, and those guys on defense. I do think they have enough guns up front
All right.
To
I'll
be
be
fair.
honest. I'll be honest. I'm sick and tired of talking
Yeah.
about basement teams
Yeah, we
that
can get
are
past this.
irrelevant garbage,
Okay.
especially
All right, let
when
me-
they're Western
I'll-
teams.
I'll
Now we'll
just
get-
list my tiers real quick because I'm the only one that hasn't gone yet. Fighting for number one pick, I have Anaheim, Arizona, Chicago, Montreal, Philadelphia, and San Jose, much like you guys. And then in my mid tier, I have Calgary, Nashville, Detroit, the Islanders, Ottawa, Vancouver, St. Louis, and Washington. Just to touch on it real quick, because you guys already discussed this, so I'll just real quick. I think Washington is not going to be a lottery team while Ovechkin's on the team. I think they keep the team just good enough to satisfy him while he chases Gretzky's record. They're not going to be good. They're not going to make the playoffs, but they're going to be just good enough to make watching him chase the record fun. They'll still stack in with serviceable veterans that can just, keep a team afloat. I don't think they're going to be a lottery pick quite yet.
I fully agree with you, except for the very last point where I think you kind of contradicted yourself. I think the Caps, if the Caps were out west with their exact same roster, I have them up at least a tier.
Okay.
But being in the Metro, I don't see a single path that they make the playoffs.
There's no path for them.
I don't have them in the playoffs.
Right. So if they're not in the playoffs, they're a lottery team, right?
When I say lottery, I mean
Lottery.
like top two picks.
Right. Like bottom five.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. No
Yeah.
problem. I can see your argument. That's fine.
Yeah.
So as a blanket term, moving forward, if I say lottery, lottery technically is the top two picks. I mean like a top five pick. They're not going to be a top five pick.
Okay. No strong feelings against that. That's fine.
Okay.
So the only ones that I figured might have some pushback in my mid category would be Calgary, the Islanders, and possibly Ottawa. Do you guys feel strongly about any of those?
So we're talking third from the bottom, right?
No, this is second from the bottom.
Second from the bottom. Not
Yeah,
fighting
I
for
got it.
number one pick, but extremely mid.
Yeah, I have the Islanders 2 tiers up from here, and then I have Ottawa.
You
and
have
Calgary.
Columbus. Oh no, well you have Columbus bottom tier. I'm counting them as
Oh,
garbage
then
pile. This is your third from the bottom.
Yeah, so if Columbus is in the fighting for number one draft pick with the other teams, this would be my second from the bottom. With Columbus being in its own tier, it's my third from the bottom.
Right. So before we get into that, did you want to go on any sort of Columbus tirade like I did with the Flyers? I'll cut you off because I know you could go for hours.
No.
Okay.
You know what? I think I've said and done enough to the city of Columbus. I will just leave it as I don't care how. What?
I'll be honest. I'm surprised you even recognize them as a city.
Well, listen, I've driven through Ohio before, and it is overcast with dead trees and a ton of RV dealerships and just about nothing else. It's terrible, and I hated it.
Yeah.
But I will leave it at I don't care how many goals they score. I don't care how many points they score. I don't care if Gary Bettman says they're going to be in the playoffs. I don't recognize them. They're not my NHL team.
Understandable.
Fair.
So as far as your mid tier, Calgary, Nashville, Detroit, Islanders, Ottawa, Vancouver, St. Louis, Washington. These are teams that you think are outside, right? They're not going to make playoffs because you have an extra team in your top three.
Yeah.
So these are
Right,
definitely
so-
outside. Okay.
Yes, these are outside the playoffs teams. The only ones I would really consider moving up would be Calgary or the Islanders. But I think the Islanders are going to start feeling the Lou Lamoriello late Devils effect of they're getting so much older without adding any young guys that are really worth anything.
Like
They're
13,
tying
14 Devils, I feel like, with them.
Right, they're tying up all their money into this squad that I just don't think is that good. They're not leaving themselves any room to improve. Sorokin is going to keep them in games, is maybe going to push for a wild card spot on his back. Otherwise, I just the only word I would use to describe the New York Islanders organization is uninspired. I don't think they're terrible. I just think when I look at their roster, I'm just uninspired. I just don't see any ceiling to it.
It's like Matt Barzal and a bunch of guys. Even though they got Bolt at the deadline last year, it just doesn't feel very... It's uninspiring is a good word for them.
It's kind of like Maroon 5. If Adam Levine showed up with 4 guys behind him and said, hey, we're Maroon 5, you would just believe him, right? you don't know what the other guys look like. It's just Matt Barzal and the boys. I don't know what the rest of them look like.
Yes, I mean they're the team I disagree with. You know, if you don't remember my Metro rankings, I think they're they're a bubble playoff team. I could see them falling out. I actually have an extra team in my top 3 out of the East. I'm just that low on the West. Really, my middle 2 tiers are fairly interchangeable with a few teams. But
Well, I'll say real quick, the reason that I have them in the tier that I have them is because there's one team that, and this is division specific, there's one team that could have taken their place, that they could have taken this team's place, and that's the Pittsburgh Penguins.
mhm.
I could have switched those, and if there was a spot to be had, it would be Pittsburgh's spot. They can be interchangeable. The only thing I think is, I think Pittsburgh actually got marginally better this offseason.
Yep.
They're also aging. Don't get me wrong; their stars are getting old every year, but
Their stars are way different than the Islanders.
Their stars are stars. They're not just aging guys.
Yeah, they're Hall of Famers.
Crosby has that. Right, Crosby has that Tom Brady effect where every single year is the year that all the analysts say, well, this is going to be his last year. He's finally aging. He's finally going to start showing his age. He's finally going to slow down. And then every year he just doesn't. He's just amazing every single year. So like with Tom Brady, I learned don't do that then. Just don't bet against him until it happens.
Yep.
So I'm sticking with that for now. I think the GM has done a great job this offseason at least of trying to maximize their window while those guys are still on the team, unlike Washington has. So I bumped the Pittsburgh up. I can easily see them bumping back down and the Islanders bumping up in their spot.
Yeah, really, my biggest thing for Islanders is Sorokin. I think Sorokin does enough to get them in, and yeah, that's really it. If they didn't have Sorokin, he goes down, I would drop them so hard.
Yeah, no, I mean, if Sorokin goes down, it's just they're going to be fighting for the number 1 overall pick. I don't think that's too contentious of a take.
So I actually, my mid, or how I put it, the can't be taken seriously tier. Now, I do think one of these teams makes playoffs because, like I said, I do have only 15 in my making playoff tiers.
This is your tier I have a problem with. I have a problem with one team.
So I've got Columbus, again, in my Metro ranking.
Disgusting.
I think Fantilli comes in and is amazing. Johnny Hockey is still Johnny Hockey with Line. Their defense basically got a full overhaul and is actually legit. The goaltending is maybe a question mark, but if it even slightly bounces back, I have them in that kind of bubble on the outside looking in tier, right? I got Ottawa. So these aren't in any sort of order as far as like who I'm higher or lower on, but I definitely think they're outside looking in, but maybe they kind of go on a sort of run. They have a lot of young guys. Stützle is a stud. I could see him popping off and like really carrying this team fairly hard. They brought in Tank, who, you know, he's going to put some goals in. I don't know how his overall play with the team's going to be, but again, outside looking in, I can see them being there. Same with Detroit. I believe this is probably the team you disagree fairly heavily with.
No.
No? Okay.
I see one that I disagree pretty decently with.
Sure. I'm ready for it. So I got DeBrincat coming in with Detroit, bumps them up to outside looking in for me. I think the Atlantic's pretty tough, but a team I do have a tier higher, but I could see falling into this one is like Boston. So I think they're kind of a wild card on how my middle 2 tiers kind of shake out. I got Pittsburgh. They're just old. If they get Carlson, I bump them up. If they don't, and they just kind of stay as is, outside looking in, being in the Metro, I just think the Metro is fairly stacked, at least for their top 3.
Yeah.
Minnesota just has too much dead cap for me.
That's my problem.
That was my problem too.
If Minnesota doesn't have their dead cap, I would be so high on Minnesota. I just think they are fairly handicapped in what they can do.
They had 105 points last year.
I just like their team too much.
Maybe even more.
Yeah, I just don't see how they improve enough that I confidently have them in. Now, again, the Central is weak, like I said.
I was going to say, who's knocking them out?
If I had to pick a team to throw in playoffs, it's probably them. Just of the teams, but I actually do not hate what Nashville did at all, and they still have Soros.
Made the same face.
We'll
It's just
see.
so
There's
mid.
always a shakeup in playoffs. It's never the same 16
Right.
teams repeating.
Sure.
And I went with this in mind of I'm not picking the same exact teams to make it that made it last year.
Fair.
If I had a team have to fall out, Minnesota's the pick because they just have too much dead cap. I think they played very well last year, given they had dead cap last year too. If I had to pick one team from this year to move up, it would be them.
That's fair.
Then Nashville is in the same tier. I liked what they did, but I don't think they have any chance at any sort of run.
Their offseason was weird. It was kind of like
And
Detroit.
actually, that's kind of why I have Minnesota here too. While I could see them maybe squeezing in, just being in the weak Central, I just don't see how they make a full run.
Minnesota.
But we're not. You're jumping 2 tiers saying full runs and stuff. The next tier is just barely playoffs, not full runs.
Correct. I still think they're outside looking in. I think they are fighting in a bubble spot, whether they're fighting putting into the number 3 or staying in that bubble range. It's too much dead cap for me.
The Central's too mid for me to not consider. I think the top 3 teams are interchangeable. Actually, the top 2 teams are interchangeable. I think Minnesota's in 3. I think the Central's just too mid. Especially if Hellebuyck gets traded, then I don't think that division's competitive.
I don't even disagree that heavily with you guys.
Yeah.
If Minnesota's easily in, I wouldn't be surprised. Nashville I covered. Winnipeg, if they keep Hellebuyck, I think they're here. If they move him, I'm dropping him down.
That's fair.
Same with their other guys. If they move other guys, they're moving down, right? Like Scheifele, whatever, moving them. Calgary, all dependent on Markstrom, really. Does Markstrom bounce back? I'm actually kind of confident that he has a much better year. Is it good enough to get him in? We'll see.
I think they'll bounce back. I can get to my bubble teams in a sec. I guess I'll just do it right now. I have Calgary in my bubble tier.
And my last team in there is St. Louis. We already talked about them, but I have them here.
Aggressively mid.
Yep.
Calgary, they got rid of Sutter, right? Yeah. And I don't know who their new head coach is. I think there's going to be a whole new lease on life in Calgary with a bunch of those guys. You kind of saw, I think there was a report that came out early in the offseason, like a bunch of guys like requested trade out of Calgary. And then
Tyler Toffoli.
Tyler Toffoli. I think, did he actually request one?
Probably.
I mean, let's just go with that because that sounds better.
I don't know officially if he did or not. I think it was just one of those. It was known that he was unhappy, much like other guys.
Right. There was.
I think Lindholm was the one that requested.
I think you're right. Yeah. There was. I mean, just to cut to the chase, there was a lot of unrest in that locker room with Daryl Sutter. I think a lot of those guys just don't fit that play style anymore. And then with Jacob Markstrom kind of turning into a pumpkin last year, like it didn't really matter how well they played when he was just gonna like let every shot in essentially. I don't think they're good enough to get into the playoffs and have Winnipeg 1 tier above them. I think I like Winnipeg's depth a lot more post PLD trade more. I don't think they're still good enough to make it in though, but my bubble tier is them, Vancouver, Pittsburgh, Ottawa, Nashville, and then I actually have Boston here. I think we kind of agree on all of those, and then except Boston. I don't think. Do you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I would say so. I think the only thing is you bumped up Ottawa and Nashville, where I think
Ottawa barely missed the playoffs last year.
This is so like irrational on my part, and I'll admit that right off the top. I don't know what it is about them. It's not even necessarily concerned with their roster players. It's probably just me looking at a logo and saying, nah, I don't feel it. There's just been this pesky Sens reputation that they're this underdog rebuilding climbing team, and they're going to keep getting better. Like I said before, rebuilding teams get better over time because they get all these young guys and they get all these guys that just need their time to get better. I don't know what it is about Ottawa, but I feel like it's been a few seasons now of these guys are the sneaky guys that are going to make some noise, and they just really aren't moving the needle for me.
They're getting devil's treatment from the past couple off seasons until they finally made it, but I don't think they have that explosion that we did.
Yeah, I think they're still missing a piece or two that the Devils had in place already. That the Devils kind of built 98% of a team ready to go, and that 2% was goalies that just tanked everything. I don't think Ottawa has that same just one position away until they can explode type roster setup. I think they're just upper mid trying to push up, and they just. I think they thought DeBrincat was going to be the thing to put them over the top, and when that didn't work out,
that just didn't
it
seem to really fit. Yeah,
just didn't pan out. I think they're trying to tread water with Tarasenko and say, we're going to buy ourselves one more year to try to get that guy again to really push us over the top. But as of right now, I just don't think they have him.
the same way had Arizona, maybe mistakenly at the top of my aggressively mid. I think I have Ottawa at the very top of my bubble, maybe 1 and 2 with Boston, interchangeable. They barely missed last year. I think Tim Stützle, like Jake alluded to earlier, I think he's going to explode this year.
He already did.
I think he's got another level to go. He had 90 points, I think, last year. Much like Jack, I think he can push 400 points on a regular basis. I think he's that good.
Yeah, he had 90 and 70.
Brady, it's also contingent on if Claude Giroux decides to start aging. Because if he does, and if he takes a step back, that's obviously not going to be good because he's a very key contributor to their offense. I don't know. I kind of like what they're doing up front. I think their defense is fairly underrated. The addition of Chikrin last year, I think, kind of solidified their top 4 a bit. And in net, they got Korpisalo, I think it was, that in the offseason. So they're running Korpisalo and Forsberg in net, which I think is good enough to...
Doesn't do much for me.
It's not one of the top echelon. I think it's kind of like in the similar tier of Vitek and Schmid, maybe lower depending on how you view each duo.
Yeah,
I think it's good enough to maybe push for a spot, but again, I think the Atlantic is just. I don't think it's this year. Maybe a year or two away for them still.
Yeah. In the interest of pushing up a tier here, I'm just gonna run through my bubble teams. We've kind of gone over most of them. I'm only introducing, I think, 1 or 2 to conversation here. But I have Boston, Buffalo, Los Angeles, Minnesota, Pittsburgh, and Winnipeg. If Winnipeg loses Hellebuck, they instantly go down. I probably really should have had them down one more as it is. I'm realizing that now. So I don't feel very strongly about having Winnipeg in that tier. The one team I do feel strongly about, which I imagine you guys agree with this, is Buffalo. Buffalo is going to be a bubble playoff team, as much as I hate to admit it, because I've been really, I mean, do you have them in can make a run?
No, in playoffs, just playoffs.
Okay, yeah. Well, so my bubble, as I said at the top of the podcast, my top 3 tiers has 17 teams, so only 1 team in the bubble is not going to make it, and I think I just outed Winnipeg as that team, so I theoretically would have Buffalo making it. Buffalo is what Ottawa claims they are. I think Buffalo has done exactly what I've said like 3 times now in the essence of a rebuild of they've taken each year to just let their guys get better and better. They've racked up these, premier prospects, these top overall pick guys that just need a few years. Guys that seeing their name on a lineup 3 years ago versus seeing their name on a lineup now is a different opinion. So they really didn't need to change much. I think they're a good team. Again, as much as it pains me to say it, I've been really harsh on Buffalo on Twitter, so I may owe some apologies in the near future. Not looking forward to that. I never am, mostly because I'm just never wrong. But Buffalo has to be a bubble team at this point. I'm sure you guys agree with that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think basically all of us had every team within 1 tier. Like outside of Columbus, where you had your Columbus tier, and I had them as just can't be taken seriously.
Yeah.
I think all of us had every team either in the same tier or 1 tier up or down.
Yeah.
My B tier, barely playoffs, was Seattle Islanders, Boston, Florida, Tampa Bay, LA, and Buffalo. I don't think there's very many hot takes there.
No.
Boston, again, I think they're probably the most wild cardy team there with the Islanders, maybe. Just they lost their 2 centers. Their guys step up. Does Pasta just carry them?
They need their goaltending to do what they did last year again.
It's their goaltending that keeps me there as opposed to actually dropping them down a tier. It's really their goaltending. Again, same with the Islanders that keeps them in this. They will make playoffs over other teams because their forwards are just good enough, but their goalies are the difference maker in putting them there. I really don't have too much to say there. I'd say Seattle for me is in the B tier as opposed to a possible run team because I don't think they have the game breaker who is necessary for a true cup run.
For the same reason, yep.
I think they are solidly built. I think they're really like if they made one big trade type move and got a stud,
They were rumored for Carlson for a little bit. That would have been really good.
they maybe could move into that run tier. But just for me, they are going to be scary in playoffs. They're going to be a team that no one wants to play against.
Goaltending's big for them. I don't think I trust Grubauer
But
still.
goaltending and no true game breaker in the skaters. Just I could not. There's no way I could move them up a tier. But I think they're fairly safely making playoffs. I already talked about Islanders, Boston. I mean, Florida made the Cup finals last year. Not that that's a guarantee for anything. Just look at Montreal. But they got Matty Tkachuk. I think their team's still very solid.
I think
their goaltending is probably the most sus part.
Yeah.
Does Bob repeat in any sort of way? What happens with Knight? That type of ordeal. But I think they still end up making playoffs, whether that's bubble or otherwise. Again, those middle two tiers, there's a little bit of movement that can happen there. Lightning, they're just getting older, but they still have Vasilevsky. So
yeah, I have them.
I
have
think
them
they're there.
Florida one tier up, but I think I kind of agree with a lot of what you said for your.
If I had to move one team here up to a run possibility, it's the Lightning because they're the Lightning.
It has to be.
But I just think they're old. You know, they're just getting another year older. Their cap situation is just getting another year worse. I just, if they didn't really do it last year, I don't see how they're better this year outside of their star players refilling the tanks, really. So, again, I could, if I was going to move one team up, it's Tampa. LA, they're good enough to make playoffs for sure in a weak West.
They'll make it. They don't do anything.
But are they any sort of run option? I just don't see it.
No.
And Buffalo is my young gun stud team that is going to push another team out, will make playoffs, but still kind of like we were last year, will get some sort of reality check, whether that's second round, third round, wherever it may be. I just don't see them making that full run yet. But gosh, is Buffalo going to be a problem for years?
The one underdog team that I think will be a thorn in the devil's side in the next 5 to 10 years, when both coming up.
Yeah, I mean, Devils Sabres as a conference final.
Oh, that would be so much fun. That will be so much fun to watch.
It's a very, very real possibility. So I'm gonna bump up again here. I think we're all pretty much in agreement with that tier.
Yep.
I have Florida in my can make a run tier. I have Florida, the Rangers, Seattle, Tampa, and Edmonton. Florida, I think, is the definition, and as we saw last year, is the definition of can make a run. Are they an absolute juggernaut that's going to make the Cup Finals again safely? No, they are not. Their goaltending, I think everyone kind of forgets, because Bobrovsky showed up in the playoffs, everyone forgets what Bobrovsky was before the playoffs.
He's been aggressively mid the past 4 or 5 years.
He has. He really has been. And sometimes
goalies like that. Mid's putting it nicely.
Aggressively mid.
He's had some bad years.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people forget that when guys like that step up, that they will fall back down to earth, or they can at least. So they are the definition for me of can make a run, but they're not safely going to. The Rangers are the Rangers. They're a good team. I really don't see them getting past Carolina, New Jersey, some other teams in their way, or if you're in the playoffs, you got to get past both of them. I don't see that happening, but they can. Who knows? Shesterkin can cure all.
My whole argument for Rangers is Shesterkin.
Yeah.
Shesterkin can do whatever he wants.
That's it.
Except beat the Devils in the first round. Seattle, I agree with you guys. They're good. They have some potential, but they don't have that game breaker that really, really needs to break out. Edmonton has nothing but game breakers but they don't have the back end. I don't think they're as complete of a team as they need to be, and I think some of their supporting cast really needs to be playing at their best. Guys like Nugent Hopkins and Evander Kane really need to be on their game to support guys like McDavid and Draisaitl, so they can make a run. They're probably the closest for me into contenders. I just already had a ton of contenders that I had to single someone out here. Mm-hmm. Edmonton is like a fringe contender, and as long as they have McDavid, they will always be a fringe something, whether it's contender or can make a run. But I just don't see Nugent Hopkins having another season like he did, and some of the supporting guys. Yeah, I feel like they overachieved just a little bit around McDavid and Draisaitl. So that's my can make a run tier.
I think I'm kind of in line with all of you guys in the can make a run tier. The only team that I have there that I don't think either of you do is Vegas, even though they did make
Yes.
the cup final last year, and then obviously they won the cup.
Yeah, say make the cup
Yeah,
final.
they made the cup.
Won it.
They made the cup and then won it against Florida, who I also have in the can make a run tier. I kind of want to switch them with one of the teams I have above them, but for the sake of time, I won't do that. Vegas, I don't think Aiden Hill's that guy. I think he had a really hot run. I mean, we saw it in the Devils Knights game. I think it was like in late in season, like in March, where Aiden Hill had like 52 saves, something like that.
Dude, I was there. It was brutal.
That game, I mean, that game cost the Devils the division because they lost the division by 1 point, and they probably should have won that game. They probably should have gotten the extra point. I think they might have the tiebreaker over Carolina. I'm not sure. They did, yeah. I like a lot of their pieces. I don't think they did anything too crazy over the offseason. They extended a couple of guys, as teams do after they win the cup. But they'll be there in the semifinals, conference finals. They might make the cup final again. But
I don't know. I like them a lot. I think they're kind of a juggernaut.
Sure, fair. I mean, they got their first taste of victory. Why not go back to back? Okay, I think that wraps up everyone outside of our cup contenders, right?
So I just didn't touch on my run tier. So it's A run is possible, my A tier. So I've got Avalanche, Oilers. Oilers is my definition of can make a run team. Just make David dry. That really, it's just those two. Rangers and Toronto. Toronto is very contingent on Nylander staying. Very, very contingent. If Nylander is moved, and you almost never win the trade when you're moving the better player.
Yeah.
So I just don't see how they get better moving Nylander, unless they pull some miracle off. But I don't see Tree Living doing that. So if they move Nylander, I would drop them down into they're just a playoff team. I just don't think they would have a chance at an actual run. But that being said, with Nylander, they are definitely a run possible team. They just need to get the monkey off the back, really. Avalanche, for me, are in this tier, which I think disagrees with both of you.
I don't hate them here because they feel very, very, very top heavy out of most teams at the top.
That's my reason. They are very top heavy. They don't really have the depth, I think, to compete with a lot of the Western teams. We kind of saw it with Seattle that the depth crushed them. If they would have went up against Vegas, again, the depth would have crushed them. McKinnon and Makar are insane. But you also have to remember, does Landeskog make it back?
I don't think he is.
I think they've already ruled it out.
Right? So if Landeskog was here, I'd be like, okay, maybe. So what do they do with that money? And do they fill out their depth with it? So they're still Makar McKinnon. So I could not put them lower than this.
Yeah.
But I just don't see how they're contenders as currently is with injuries and all that. Rangers, I touched on. It's Shesterkin.
Yeah. Okay.
That rounds out my tier. I think I actually have the least amount of teams between all of us in my top two tiers. So BP over here bloated his tiers. I just want to throw that out.
I kind of threw playoff seeding out the window and tried to kind of just make even tiers, put around the same amount of teams in each tier. So I do have 6 cup contenders, which I understand might be a bit much.
I got 4.
I
have 2 from each. Right.
3 teams per side contending. I don't know. I don't think that's unreasonable.
I don't think it's crazy to say that.
I mean, I think anything above. Well, I originally had 7 with the Oilers, and that's when I was just like, I can't have 7 contenders. I gotta toss them down. So, contenders, I have Carolina, Dallas, Toronto, Colorado, New Jersey, and Vegas. I can see the argument being made for Colorado and maybe Toronto to be pushed down. I do agree with what you guys are saying. I just think after last year, the Avalanche are going to be pushing heavy on a comeback. I do think some of the guys that they got could work out in a way that they want them to, like Ross Colton and Miles Wood. Miles Wood, I think we could do another full hour on if we wanted to. But if he returns to form even a little bit for them, he could be a really nice complementary piece when we are discussing depth. Toronto, I just think they just have so much firepower that has to break through at some point. And I know that's kind of every fan's opinion and what the league has been saying for 5 years now. So I understand this is kind of going against everything I said about the Tom Brady Sidney Crosby stuff, where now I'm the guy saying, "Oh, well, it's got to happen one of these years now," even though I said I've learned not to do that. So I'm just gonna take the L on that. But I think the real clear-cut 4 contenders for me are going to be Carolina, New Jersey, Dallas, and Vegas. I
That's my
think
top
those-
tier. It's
I,
those
yeah, I,
four.
I think they are just the best teams in the league.
Yep.
It's really unfortunate that Carolina has to be in our division. I'm very not happy about that, but here we are.
Yeah, I
It
don't
makes
know.
it more fun. It does make it more interesting.
It does, but it's annoying because
It
if the
is
Devils could
annoying.
go 16-0 to win the cup, I wouldn't hate that either.
Right. So
Um,
we're all pretty much in agreement on the contenders here, right?
Yeah, if I had this, like I said, if I had to switch any of the two, I think it's Florida in for Toronto. I love their forwards. I think they did some good things on defense. Goaltending obviously is a question mark, but they seemingly made it work last year. And then Vegas in your cup contender tier, I don't hate that either because they are the reigning Stanley Cup champions.
Absolutely. And I think that about wraps it up for our tiers.
I'll just touch on my guys real quick, but I agree. The top 4 teams are the top 4: Devils, Carolina, Vegas, Dallas. I got 2 from each conference. I'll start out west. I mean, Dallas is just a young team, are really just entering their primes kind of the same way we are. I think we have more studs than they do, to be honest. But I mean, I'm a huge Heiskanen fan. Love the guy. Love the guy.
He's so good.
Yeah, insane. I still take Nico above him in a redraft, but Heiskanen's amazing. I mean, J-Rob, Hintz, Ottinger. Although Ottinger actually showed some kinks in the armor in the playoffs last year, so I'm very interested to see how that plays out this year. I think if he has another run like that, I'm a little bit more questionable. But goalies are voodoo. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt on this one because I think the rest of their roster, especially bringing in Duchesne, right,
Yeah.
it's loaded up.
I
And
love their
outside
forwards.
of Vegas out west, I just don't see any other team that matches up to them blow for blow from top to bottom. Vegas, defending cup champs. I do agree that I think a lot of Hill's success was coming in rested and not playing as the starter full
That
season.
3 goalie system was
Really works for them. So I am interested to see how he plays, but there's not enough there given their strong core for me to bump them out of a contender spot. I really wanted 2 teams from each division in here. And between, Oilers and Avs, the other teams I had in these top 2 spots, I couldn't, again, Avs not having the depth. Same for the Oilers, really. I just couldn't bring myself to put them over Vegas at all. So to me, they're still cup contenders out west. And then Carolina Devils. We really touched on this a lot in our Metro rankings.
Yeah.
They're both loaded stack teams. Carolina, I could see the argument of currently built as is. They just have more experience and guys that are built into their system that just plug and play.
Yeah.
Whereas we're a team that is still growing together. If I had to pick a team for this season, I'm still taking the Devils, but I think Carolina's right breathing down our neck, and I would not be surprised if they do take the division again. But long term, we are the easy choice between the two. Carolina's really has to take it this year or next, which is why they made the offseason moves that they did. And it's those offseason moves that I think have them still in the conversation with us.
Sure.
But long term, we're the easy pick. And I'm sticking with that for sure. But if I had to pick the favorite to win the cup, it's going to be us. Obviously, these other teams are hot trash garbage.
Yeah, I think all 3 of us can agree. Number 1 is going to be the Devils.
That's because fake fan JP's not here, so it's all good.
Yeah, by the way, quick call out for JP, and I don't think he's even going to listen to this episode, let alone for this long.
He might be the
But-
one editing, so he's definitely going to hear this loud and clear.
All right, well, here, you know what? I'm talking directly to you then, JP. He claimed that he could not come tonight because he had a lot of work to do. The only thing he forgot about is that Discord shows when you're using your computer for other stuff, and he's been playing video games the whole time we've been on this call.
Fucking way. He is.
Yeah, I'm not lying. He is a fraud. He's a scammer.
For an hour, and how long have we been recording for? 59 minutes and 37 seconds.
Yeah, so I think we should have the TV show Survivor, a Survivor-style vote if he stays on the island or not. That's my closing thought.
My
JP's
take
on the hot
is
seat.
he just doesn't have good enough takes to make an NHL tier list. He was so afraid that he was going to be called out by the end of the season for his hot garbage opinions, and so he wanted to sit this one out, which I respect. I get it. It's tough putting your opinions out there for the public to ridicule, but my tier list is flawless. So come at me again, Minnesota fans. I can hear your arguments,
Yeah.
but really everyone else kick rocks.
All right, and on that note, I think we're about done here. So I'll leave it with my closing thought, which is Jesper Bratt is the best player in the NHL.